Hello everybody, it's a video that I've wanted to make for a little while. It is my updated table predictions. Stick with me through this one. I will just say, you can give your predictions in the November international break. It doesn't mean it's locked in, and the supercomputer, I've all kind of like analytically said something relatively similar to what I've done. I've gone a little bit maverick on some, a little bit obvious on others. Let me know your final Premier League table predictions, everybody. Fascinated to hear your thoughts. Let's get into it, shall we? First, I've got Arsenal at 3 straight seasons as runners-up. The additions of the likes of Gyökeres and Zubimendi. I think Zubimendi's been an unreal signing. Calafiori has really come to the fore. Gabriel's been insane this season. And when you're looking at a back four, and Saliba's probably been one of the weakest of them all, that is crazy. Yuri and Timber has been exceptional this season. They don't really concede goals. It doesn't happen anymore. That's how you win titles. I've still got Arsenal to win it, to be honest with you. I still see City as being in some sort of mini transition and moving away from Rodri just in general. I think he's going to be a big sort of move away. I know Nico Gonzalez has come in and looks exceptionally good, and that is Manchester City, just player after player after player. But I think that moving on from Rodri and De Bruyne just in that midfield compartment is going to be a little bit more of a transitional phase. Second, I've got Man City. Still a relatively deep squad. The churn and the age has had to move on, but I do think they've got enough quality in there in Shirky, in the likes of Phil Foden, obviously in the likes of Erling Haaland, who's having an unbelievable season. I think he's going to be that differential, that buffer from third, fourth to second. That's where I've got City. In third, I have got Chelsea. Under Maresca, they finished fourth in 24-25 and started exceptionally good, really, this season, didn't they? A lot more organised, and the players that they brought in, the pick of the bunch, in my opinion. Esteval looking like an absolute prime Brazilian flair player. Cole Palmer not really been in proceedings as of yet because obviously he's been out of the side. That's still coming together at some stage. I think when he comes back in, maybe a few additions in January again from Chelsea, I think they'll finish a little bit higher. It feels like same players, different brain. Chelsea at this moment in time, albeit the form, I think long term the likes of Garnacho intertwined with Esteval and Cole Palmer will really come to the fore. I think Caicedo's been one of the top midfielders, if not the best midfielder in the league this season as well. Fourth, Liverpool. I do think they'll turn it around. I do think the likes of Isak and Ekitike will come to the fore. I do think that will happen. I do think Wirtz will turn it around. There is just an adjustment period when it comes to the Premier League, the physicality, the athleticism. We mentioned this several times before. And I think Arne Slot will turn them around. I think you've seen the capability of Liverpool up against Madrid. That's Liverpool really dialed up. They just need to get that element really, I don't know, projected throughout the season a little bit more consistent. Because as of right now, it's too many inconsistent performances, and they need to be a little bit more, at the front of the pile when it comes to Liverpool's performances. That performance against Real Madrid. Spurs, context bomb. They finished 17th last season in the league, but won the Europa League. Obviously, we know they sacked Postecoglou, but I do really rate Frank, and they're all saying he's had a bad season. I hope that the style of football isn't taken into consideration too much, because Frank will have them finishing high, but it's this Tottenham way of playing, isn't it? They kind of want a beautiful way of playing, and then they want to finish high. Sometimes you've just got to submit one for the other, and I think at this moment in time, Tottenham will finish in the top 5 with Frank. I think that will be a success with where they finished last season. They've got a lot of decent players in there. The key for me is always keeping Van de Ven and Romero as fit as possible, but Danzo has given that sort of buffer as well. I think going forward with Maddison coming back and Kulusevski in the new year, that'll just give them that added freshness as well to finish in the top 5. Sixth, I've gone with Man United. I think they've been a lot better this season, even with the likes of, Garnacho, Højlund, Mainu all sort of leaving. They have brought in the likes of Cunha and Buemo is clutch. I think Cunha is able to, hold that shirt, which it's weighed heavy for a lot of players in the last sort of 15 years, aside from Bruno Fernandes. So yeah, I think they'll be fine. They're in 6th for me. Aston Villa, I've got in 7th. I think, Emery's Villa finished 6th and reached the Champions League quarters in 24-25, which they were very unlucky there. I do think the squad is very decent. I do think they will add again, obviously dependent on their PSR restrictions, but obviously sales might have to come into the picture there with Villa. But yeah, I still think they'll do okay. I think Emery's just such a world-class manager. They've won 6 games in 8. I do see Aston Villa just getting stronger, being able to churn out these results as well. I've got them in 7th. Bournemouth, very close next. I've got them in 8th. under Iraola, they've become one of the best coached smaller sides, if you want to put them there, in the Premier League. An aggressive press, clear patterns, smart recruitment. We've already seen them beaten Arsenal at the Emirates very recently and finish a top half in obviously recent seasons. I've got them as like the data darlings, not rich enough for the top four, but tactically good enough to live in that kind of 7th to 9th bracket. If you actually watch Bournemouth, 8th doesn't feel wild at all. Next, I've got Brighton. I think Brighton have just got this stack of brilliant footballers. They played Leeds United very recently, my club. They had about 7 out, and they've still got the likes of Diego Gomez coming in, Danny Welbeck, Jorginho Rutter. They've still got so many more players to come back in and really give them that sort of oomph. So yeah, I think they're just a smart football club, and I see them finishing and having more than enough to finish in that top 10. 10th, I've got Sunderland. I think Sunderland, we've seen teams come up not recently, but in the last sort of 20, 30 years in Reading, who finished 5th. You've seen, if you go even further back, Ipswich finishing, I believe it was 5th, Marcus Stewart and co. And then you've obviously got the recent guests who've been up and done really well in the likes of obviously Bournemouth, but going a little bit further back, you've got Sheffield United and Leeds as well, finishing the top 10. I think Sunderland have enough to do that. I think they've got enough quality. The PSR restraints mean that they can go again in the January window, which I think the world has already been linked to Barcelona. I think it's Fermin Lopez over there, which I don't think they'll get done because that's probably going to cost them around about 80 million quid. But I think there's been sharp recruitment. There's a clear identity, a really high ceiling with the squad. I think there might be a tiny dip with AFCON, but I think it's being sort of over-embellished by people and over-focused on. I think I had them as surviving this season, but I think they're going to completely outperform that. And there might as well be like a small gap between like 10th and 16th in terms of points. I think Sunderland finish on the top of that. I think they're going to be a real problem to beat. They are tough. They've got depth in all areas. They've recruited in all areas, not just specific ones. They've recruited in fullbacks, fullback regions when it comes to Gertruda. They've got players who've stepped up with the likes of, Trihume and Mienda and Isidore, etc. They've got centre-backs as well in Alderete, in Michele and Dan Ballard. There's a little bit of depth there as well, and they're proving it at such a good level. And week in, week out, the midfield looks beasted. Are they going to do anything again in the January window? That'll be interesting. Out wide, they look proficient. They're not here to make up the numbers, this lot, and I think they do finish in the top 10. Crystal Palace, I've got them in 11th. I think Europe takes a little bit away from Palace, but never terrible, rarely spectacular. But I think the beautiful thing is Palace's record at home is extremely good, and I think they'll beat a lot of teams at home. Even the top sides have got Palace in 11th. Europe might take a little bit away from them. Everton, I think, will have a successful season and finish in 12th. I had them a little bit higher, I'll be honest with you. I had Everton a little bit higher earlier on in the season. Moyes will have a hard-to-beat squad there, and I think that, even if they have a few injuries in that front line, maybe the likes of Tyler Dibben will be able to come in, fill in, and do okay. I think Everton will have to do something, maybe in that midfield in the January window. But they're not fun to watch, Everton, but they're absolutely solid. And I think they'll do okay. But 12th, I think, will be a relative success. Newcastle, I've got them in 13th. In 24-25, they finished 5th and won the Carabao Cup, but I think there's been a massive drop-off, a huge drop-off. You've got the Champions League load, injuries, and a slightly thinner squad. Eddie Howe feels like, there's some selection errors. I think Joe Linton should be out of that side by now. I think when you look at Dan Burn at left-back as well, Eddie Howe's maybe sticking with his favourites a little bit now. Lewis Hall should be right in that side. Should Ramsdale be playing as well? It doesn't feel like Eddie's going to budge on that. Ramsdale should be ahead of Nick Pope for me at this moment in time, especially with their style of playing. A lot to think about there when you think about Newcastle. Forest, I've got in 14th. They live on the edge, don't they, Nottingham Forest? I think there might be investment in January again with Marinakis, obviously back in the new man. Dyche, but I think overall Dyche will get them into a really decent position. They've still got injuries to come back, the likes of Callum Hudson-Odoi, Chris Wood. I think they'll be absolutely fine, Nottingham Forest, and you could see them investing again. But the likes of Olarine have been out for a sustained period of time. It's been problematic, but Nico Williams has been brilliant. And I think they've got more than enough quality in that Forest side. They won at the weekend as well, which is the first home win since the opening day of the season. I can see Forest cracking on right now. Not been exceptional, but at least cracking on. But Europe will drag them down a little bit. Fulham 15th. They're 15th now. Classic example of losing players and in my opinion, not really been able to To replace them, I do think Marco Silva leaves, which I think will impact them. And I think that's then dependent on who they get in next. He's not happy with the recruitment, but I've got them in 15th. But yeah, bit of a mess season for Fulham, but they've got enough to stay up. 16th, I've got Brentford. I do think they will fall a little bit. I do think this sort of start that they've had, where they've been brilliant and beating the likes of Newcastle and many others at home. They look very good beating Liverpool as well. But I do think that they will drop down a little bit when teams start to figure out that, Keith Andrews is focusing on that set piece heavy, dominant style quite often. And can teams deal with that a little bit more in the second half of the season? We'll have to wait and see. There might have to be a little bit more pragmatism from Keith Andrews in terms of getting the best out of personnel when that doesn't work, but it might work throughout the full season. Who knows? I just see teams in the round strengthening a little bit more than Brentford, and I think they'll get dragged down to 16th for me. I just think the system works with Keith Andrews. I just wonder about that talent level throughout a full 38 game season. West Ham I've got in 17th. I don't have them going down. I think they'll just stay up. I don't think this sort of 2-win streak will continue. I don't think they're going to rise up the table, but I think they're more than good enough to stay up. The likes of Yves Bissouma has been linked in January. They've been linked with a few other players as well, and they all look very impressive. Nuno will keep them up, and it's probably a toss-up between Brentford and West Ham, in my opinion, for that 17th. But I think there's got to be more long-termness with West Ham now, and I think that's what the fan base are cradling, really. 18th, I've got Leeds United. I think Leeds are going to stick with Farke for too long. I think there is naturally questions about recruitment. I do understand that with Leeds fans, but I think overall there has been way too much sort of given to Daniel Farke. I think he is strong in the background at Leeds. I don't know if the foundations are there for a real successful Premier League campaign, of which I maybe thought at the beginning of the season. Leeds are dropping like a stone at this moment in time in the second statistical easiest run in the Premier League. Leeds United have lost 4 out of 5. We now have the hardest run in our next 5, with games coming up against Villa, Chelsea, Man City and Liverpool, which are going to be exceptionally hard. And Farke's conservative approach to football games, which has us, I think, when it comes to directness and speed of play at the bottom in the Premier League, his slow reactive substitutions, and not getting the best out of certain personnel, I think Leeds will go down this season. So I've got Leeds in 18th. 19th, I've got Burnley. I think Burnley doing okay at the minute, and there won't be much between Burnley and Leeds. I just think Burnley just don't have enough quality to stay in the Premier League. That is literally it. I think they are punching at this moment in time when it comes to some of the teams in and around them. You rarely see Burnley get battered, even when you're looking at performances on the pitch and them going up against opponents. I always say the opening game against Spurs when they lost 3-0, they were in that game. Obviously the 5-1 against City was different, but then you look at the 3-2 loss against Man United, the 1-0 loss against Liverpool. For example, with Leeds United, I don't see Leeds getting that sort of close results against those two teams at the minute. I see Leeds getting battered. So I think Burnley are going to be tough to beat. And to be honest, it's a toss of a coin between who finishes in 18th, Leeds or Burnley, but I think both go down. And I have got bottom Wolves. I think, look, when you're on 2 points after 10, 11 games, you are going to finish bottom. I do think Fosun and She will back Rob Edwards in the window, and it'll be interesting to see what players they get, and they might be able to pick a few more up. I just don't see you being able to recover that amount of points and even finish 19th. It's a tragic start for Wolves, and losing to all the promoted teams is the dagger in the heart. But maybe next season under Rob Edwards in the Championship, there can be a bit of a revival, and think Wolves will probably be the favourites in the Championship if those 3 were to go down anyway. So guys, am I way off? Let me know in the comment section below. Fascinated to hear your thoughts on this one. As I say, don't take it too seriously. It is updated table predictions. Some people take it a little bit too far, obviously, but let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I'll see you in a bit.